Denial is a strong thing. I think the last time I heard, the average alcoholic spends about 21 years in denial. So you think just over 2 decades of convincing ourselves that I can stop whenever I want, or this isn't an issue, or I only drink because I have a stressful job, or whatever it is. We really don't like to admit that we're powerless. That's where it starts.
Hey, good morning, Tim. Tell me a little bit about what your role is with Rob's Ranch before we start to talk about the 12-step program today.
Yeah. So my name is Tim. I'm a licensed alcohol, drug, and mental health counselor with Rob's Ranch. So I work at the outpatient office in Edmond. So that's either for guys who come out of the ranch down in Purcell or Sayre. Maybe they need some aftercare, maybe some family counseling, maybe some additional individual counseling once they get out of there. We'll see them afterward. We also see guys who've never been to the ranch, just people, general population of people who just need some counseling for some kind of addiction or some kind of just issue that they're dealing with, some kind of stressor that they're dealing with, and they're not quite to the level where residential care is necessary or needed, but they just need a little bit of extra help, a little bit of extra support, and some counseling just on a one-on-one basis.
So am I right that the outpatient program is for men and women, though, because the ranch program in Sayre and Purcell is a men's faith-based facility?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So we work with individual men, individual women, as well as couples. So we've got kind of 2 levels of care that are available for men and women. We've got the outpatient, like I said, just the one-on-one or family. And then we've got the intensive outpatient program, which is a structured 8-week program, 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, that focuses on psychoeducation and just kind of group process therapy.
So I wanted to talk about the 12-step program with you today. First of all, from the standpoint of what is the 12-step program?
I think a lot of time we hear that and we think about, okay, this is going to be a means to stop drinking. This is going to be a means for me to stop gambling or stop struggling with pornography or some issue. And that they do that. Obviously, they're very good at that. But really, it's a blueprint to a new way of living life that, those of us who have dealt with addiction have never really lived before. It's a change in our patterns of thinking, the way we cope with life, the way we cope with stress, the way we interact in our relationships, our capacity to have healthy relationships, and then obviously, change some of the behaviors that we were doing that were kind of contributing to our addiction and to our addiction behavior. At a very basic level, it's a blueprint for how do I handle life on life's terms? How do I handle life without resorting to drugs and alcohol?
In a previous conversation that Jake and I had, he talked about how the mind of an addict can work a little bit differently than a person who is not an addict. And so if the 12-step is a blueprint, does it kind of help with that, with reprogramming kind of how to think, how to approach life?
It definitely can. I think it helps with providing us a new way of thinking that we were either unable or unwilling to think like that before. It changes a lot of the way that we see the world, the way we kind of interpret the reality of the world. And yeah, so it can definitely change a lot of our perception and the way that we kind of interact with things, for sure.
Okay. So what is the first step of the 12-step program?
Yeah. So the first step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. So we were admitted that we were powerless. There's a lot that's kind of wrapped up in that first step, So if you look up in the dictionary what admit means to acknowledge something to be true, typically with reluctance. And so it's kind of this begrudging, I don't really like to say that it's true. I don't really like to acknowledge that it's true. But yeah, it is true. And I think that that's a perfect word for alcoholics and addicts because we don't like to admit that we don't have anything under control. We don't like to admit that our willpower isn't sufficient. We don't like to admit that we can't handle things, that we can't handle life on life's terms. I don't think anybody does, but, particularly alcoholics and addicts, we really like to be in control. We really like to be the one that's kind of in control, And so we reluctantly admit that. And there's that old adage of, you can't heal a wound by saying it's not there. If I have a broken leg, I can't just kind of look at it and say like, that's not broken. It's fine. It'll be okay if I just kind of leave it alone, and I can kind of will myself and think myself into a way of healing this broken leg. Addiction's the same way. It just doesn't work that way. So we've got to admit that there's a problem in order for us to be able to deal with it. And denial is a strong thing. Denial is a really strong thing. I think most of us alcoholics and addicts could probably rationalize and do the mental gymnastics necessary to look at a broken leg and say, nah, it's just a scratch. It's okay. We could convince ourselves that it's okay. It's just kind of the way our brains work. So Denial is a heck of a thing. I think the last time I heard, the average alcoholic spends about 21 years in denial. So you think, just over 2 decades of convincing ourselves that I can stop whenever I want, or this isn't an issue, or, I only drink because I have a stressful job, or, whatever it is. We really don't like to admit that we're powerless. That's where it starts.
So what is step 2 of the program, and what does it mean?
I think all the steps are really important. All of them are important. They all have a lot of power. They all have a lot of capacity for change. Step 2 is probably my favorite personally. Step 2 is what we call the hope step. So step 2 is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And step 1, it's kind of a negative thing. I'm admitting that I'm powerless. I'm admitting that my life is unmanageable. I'm doing that with the hopes of doing something differently in the future. So although that is a necessary step, it is kind of a negative thing. And so in step 2, where we start to see, okay, I'm not in control. I'm not the highest power that exists. There is a God and I'm not him. And you know what? Maybe I'll be sane someday too. Maybe I can be restored to sanity. And in step 2, we kind of break that up into we came to and we came to believe. We came to meetings. We came to be around other people who are like me, who are sick and have gotten well, so that I can see, it is possible to get sober. It is possible to learn to live life on life's terms. And then we come to and we get a little bit of sobriety under our belt, and our brain just kind of starts to work again. We're halfway human again. And we just kind of start to realize like, okay, this is a thing, this can work. And then we came to believe, we came to believe that, okay, Michael, if it worked for you, well, maybe it'll work for me too. So there's a lot of hope in step 2. I think where people sometimes get tripped up is with that second half, that we could be restored to sanity, because I think, again, we don't like to be thought of as, well, I'm not crazy. I'm not insane. Why do I need to be restored to sanity? And the sanity piece of that, it's not the crazy stuff we do when we're drunk or high, right? My grandma would do crazy stuff if she were drunk or high. It's not about that. Anybody would do crazy stuff. What it's about is the fact that we take that very first drink, knowing it's killing us, and knowing it's destroying our lives, and knowing it's destroying our relationships, and yet we choose to do it anyway, right? I think it was Einstein or somebody who's attributed the quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. That's insanity. Thinking, okay, well, if I drink this time, it'll fix all my problems. And then we find out, that didn't work. Maybe if I do it again today. Oh, no, that didn't work. Well, maybe if I do it again today, right? That's the insanity. And so to be restored to sanity is just to be restored to this idea of, I don't have to resort to handling life in this way. I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah, and I can see that aspect of hope, because especially with what you said about an addict can spend 21 years in denial, which clearly shows the lack of power, that they are powerless, and that's the part of admitting that they are powerless. And then the question then comes to mind of, well, where do I get the power from? And that's the step 2.
Yeah, because in step 1, we admit, right, like the power is not in me. I am powerless. If I could stop this thing, I would, long before I got here. If I could, I would. And so just, logic would tell us then, if it's not in me, it's got to be out of me. It's got to be somewhere else, and that's where that higher power aspect comes in.
That makes perfect sense. Well, in respect of your time, I'd love to talk to you about some other steps at a later date. And
for sure. I'd love to.
For this conversation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you, Tim.